Okay, so we have 3 different horses to look at. And before we look at the video, any questions or comments about any one of them? So that
So,
when,
yeah, so the sort of question concern is Callie making sure that because she regressed a little bit. So when the last lesson I had with you was like what, November or something,
Mhm.
and right after that I got COVID, so she had 2 weeks off. And then when we went back to work, she was not the same. I don't know if she may have like fallen or slipped in the mud or, did something to herself.
So when we left off, you were working her on the long reins on a circle.
Yep.
And when you went back, did you go straight back to that exercise?
Yes.
Okay.
So,
So we'll look at it. Let's look at her first. But the only thing, because she's gated and she's older and she gets unstable easily, if she has time off, then you can always restart with putting her up against the fence and just hand walk until, like, if she's unstable and needs hand walking to kind of get back into the swing of things before getting back, because the long reins on a circle is going to be the most challenging. And so if they're unstable, that can be a big nightmare. They'll lose forward, they'll suddenly go too fast. You're having to make these huge adjustments on the long reins. And so if you find that, the lunging doesn't really help her because it doesn't give her enough support.
yeah.
But if you put her up against a fence line on one side with your body at the shoulder on the other side and use a little riding whip to get her to go forward, if you even try that coming back into work after time off, or if she's having a struggle, if she needs it, then even the hand walking on the fence line, she'll be kind of pushing on you heavy. She'll be speeding up and slowing down a lot. She'll be struggling with staying in that corridor between your body on one shoulder and the fence on the other shoulder. So if that's not easy breezy, if you do one lap around and that's not super easy for her, then the long reins will probably be more difficult.
Okay.
And we had done that in, like, thinking back when she had been out of work for a while. I think we spent 2 or 3 clinics where we were just walking her on the fence line
Yeah.
before we
We just
tried the
got
long
the
reins.
lines and stuff, and you and I were working together.
Yeah,
Yeah.
because the wiggly, when they're really wiggly, the long reins either work brilliantly right away, like they do kind of for Belle, or it's just it's like, you're going to tie yourself up in the lines because it's just so much to manage all at once. And if it's so much to manage that the horse is having big fluctuations between not going forward or panicking and running forward, or you can't quite get a consistent feel on the inside rein because she's just falling in, falling out so drastically, then the hand walking will kind of get her more stable a little bit easier and more gently. And then you go back to the long reins. And so it may be, if she has time off, you need a session or 2 or 3 of just hand walking, and then she'll be good to go back on the long reins. And you can always test it out, because
Yeah.
if you just do one lap because you don't know how it's going to go, that first lap will tell you. If she's really reactive and she's hard to keep in a narrow corridor and making big speed adjustments, then I wouldn't even bother with the long reins until that settles down.
Okay.
And
It's
that
a
may just be
there.
her
Like,
age, her breed, her development.
yeah.
So let's look at her first.
I
Let
think the
me,
carrier was there like a week or two after I got back into work with her. And when she came in the field, she almost looked lame, like walking just by herself. And he struggled a little bit to get her feet done. She was not easy at that point to, trim. And then the week after that, Jeffro was there and worked on her, and that helped. But then we didn't kind of pick back up where we had been. So I was a little surprised, but this is now, of course, I don't know, what, a month or
No,
two
and
after?
sometimes, at her age and her past lameness issues, i- with sometimes they can fall apart even when you're making a positive change. Like that's why I'm always talking about stability, stability, stability. But it's like even if she stabilizes more in the hindquarter and the back, when that happens, the front legs and the muscles around the shoulders will loosen up. And that can be a little bit chaotic as they're making that transition from front end stability to hind end stability. So it's not
Exactly
always,
where we were, right in between, and then she got 2 weeks off and it kind of all fell apart. Because what we noticed when we went to get her from the field was she was rope walking. So like her front feet were like walking, almost crossing in the front, as she was
yeah.
walking on her own.
So she could have been left in that transitional window where, with support, the hindquarter and back were becoming just stable enough that the muscles around the front limbs and the neck started to supple and let go of some chronic holding patterns. But without support and just turned out on her own, she couldn't maintain the stability of her hindquarter and back. So then and you feel it when you ride or when you're doing the groundwork as they're making that transition, as the stability increases in the back and hindquarter at the very same rate, instability is starting to come into the front end. And so she might have just been not quite stable front or back. And that sort of rope walking and lack of control would describe that.
Yeah.
So
I
anytime,
think that now.
say that again.
That may be kind of where we were, is just at a transitional point. And then when she got 2 weeks off, it left her to fall apart because she didn't have the continual support again.
Right. She was no longer strong in her old habit of movement, but she wasn't yet really reliable in the new habit of movement. And so, again, coming back to work, anytime even if she comes in from the pasture like that and you see that deviation of leg movement, I would just, for her, plan on starting with hand walking to see where she's at. Because even, getting on, putting weight on her back can aggravate the problem or it could fix it. The long reins could aggravate the problem or they could fix it. So when you add support, you kind of want to know how they're doing on their own, which is the point of just one lap of walking her around on the rail. And if she's really bad on the rail, you could try the long reins, but if it's a nightmare to get her moving or slow her down or get her straight, then the hand walking is just as fine as an early option.
Good to know.
Yeah, so she's actually more stable in her hindquarter, but what you're seeing is the kind of rustiness of not having used her hindquarter and her hind legs properly for a while. So it's very slow. And her joints, her stifle, hock, fetlock, mostly the hocks, I think, look really rusty, like
Yeah.
not smoothly functioning, right? So there, when you pull the hindquarter in and you get the hind legs to widen and you level off the top of the pelvis, if she can continue moving, even at this speed, she's stabilizing the lumbar, sacrum, and pelvis and learning to push, which eventually will pay off. If she gets stuck, like she does right there, if you lose forward on the long reins, it's their way of telling us this is too hard right now. Right. So,
It was really cold that morning too. So
yeah, so she may be a
yeah,
little stiff in her
yeah,
muscles and joints just
yeah.
from the weather on top of everything else.
I think that's probably part of it.
You're doing a good job with the long reins. Like, in other words, the point of working the long reins on a circle, you're starting to see her stability and levelness through her pelvis and low back taking hold. So she's doing quite well with the purpose of the long reins, but the leg joints are not comfortable for her working in proper flexion and extension. And she falls through the shoulders. That's when you have those big corrections, like when she really puts a lot of slack on the inside rein. And you're doing quite a good job with subtle, accurate corrections on the long reins. And that's part of the reason she's losing forward, because you're really setting her up in a way that she has to push forward on a circle with a level back and pelvis. So that's what changes the leg kinematics and why this looks so hard for her. So even at this really slow, sort of one step at a time pace, if she can maintain the forward like she's showing, then work on the long range. You're going to get more accomplished. If she loses forward like she got stuck, if that's happening more frequently than maybe once or twice in the session, then I would go to the hand walking on the rail, because that'll just be easier for her.
Yeah.
So when they lose forward, it's because they're either getting really uncomfortable or they just lack power in the push. I think she lacks power. She doesn't look uncomfortable, but it looks awkward for her to really
Yeah.
think about pushing herself forward and stabilizing on her hindquarter rather than pushing her back down, putting her head up like her normal thing was. And her
Yeah.
legs look a
And that
little
keeps
wobbly.
improving. Yeah, that was the only time she really got stuck. So,
Okay. Yeah,
yeah.
if that happens once in a while, I would continue on the long reins. If it becomes more than once or twice a session, you could also mix in one session. You could build a little bit of forward hand walking, and then once she's warmed up with something easier, you could finish the session with half the time on the long reins.
Yeah.
And to me, I mean, this is tedious as can be. And some horses, it just is what it is. It's so slow. You're just like, time crawls. You keep checking your watch. You're like, that was only 5 minutes. So, but she's doing the best she can, and she's organizing herself with a wider base of support between the hind legs, a more level top of the croup and the low back. And you can see where she sometimes, like there, the right front leg reaches in the direction of travel, which is great. Sometimes she'll put it the wrong way. Sometimes she'll be a little bent with her neck to the outside. And you have to keep, when you have very little forward to work with, you can't be as accurate with the feel of the long reins, because the more accurate you are, the more it sort of slows the horse down. So the other option, which I didn't really talk about first, and I see she's having a pee, would be if she loses forward, you could hand walk on the rail, or you could just work from directly behind her and just use the whole arena. So you could walk the length of the arena, put in a half a circle on the long reins, walk the length of the arena, put a half a circle the other way on the long reins. And the less accurate you are with the long reins, the more forward you typically get. The more
Mhm.
accurate you are with long reins, especially on a circle, because she has a hard time engaging and bringing the hind legs forward. That's why she's struggling. And her joints are probably not super comfortable getting back into action. So getting behind her like you just did and go on a straight line or random turns and random half circles to change direction, that might help her maintain more forward and be a little gentler than just standing still on a circle.
Okay.
So that gives you kind of three options to play with. And if I
Yeah.
have way too much forward, the circle is great because it slows them right down. But when you're working with the long reins on a horse losing forward, you need to balance it a bit. Like it could be hand walking in her case, lunging with other horses, working on trot and canter on the lunge line, and then doing the walking on the long reins after that. Or go behind her like straight line driving and just use the long reins that way. until she's more forward.
Yeah. And it's
And you
been
can switch
constant.
back and forth. You can sneak in a half a circle here to get more engagement and then go straight to rebuild the forward.
Yeah. And there is enough room to work circles at each end of the arena, just enough space.
Yeah. Yeah. And even if you have to weave between the jumps and you only make one full circle at this end and you sort of weave around the jumps through the rest of the arena, it would still work. But straight lines help them go more forward. I wouldn't, because she's gated, it's not really, you can't really play with second gear like you could with, walk trot without a gated horse, because sometimes sending them to the trot is easier on the long reins than working at the walk. The walk really makes them work their back muscles quite a bit. So that's another reason that they can sort of lose forward or slow way down. But really, I think slow and steady. Whoops, say that again.
I try to give her as much of the reins as possible. So like I try to keep as little of the outside rein in my hand, just enough that she's not going to like pull it out if she does, need more rein. But that way she gets the largest circle that she can.
Yes. And you could, like the other way to make it easier on the horse and build forward is instead of standing still and pivoting, you don't really have enough room in this arena, or you have a little bit of extra room. You could walk a circle on the inside and make your circle bigger that way too, which can help give you more forward.
Yeah.
So standing still and being accurate with your inside rein is the toughest version of this exercise. It requires the most amount of engagement and sort of self-propelled pushing from the horse, because it's going to level that hindquarter off first and foremost. So if you lose forward in this exercise, you can walk with her, you can make the circle less precise, you can get behind her and mix up straight lines with turns and circles. Or if none of that works, stay with hand walking until she's more stable and more forward, and then go to driving with the long reins from behind her, and then work from walking circles and make your way back to a stationary circle.
Yeah.
Those are all variations you can work with, but I mean, this doesn't look horrible to me. It's just slow and tedious and hard for her, but she's really trying. She's concentrating. She's not defensive. She's not resistant. She's just not very good at it.
She's letting me catch her most of the time too without she's wearing a muzzle again, but yeah, she's been pretty willing to work, which is nice. Both of them have been, which tells me that it must not be that bad because I don't give them treats. The only reason I show up is to pull them out and work them. So, that tells me that they are getting enough benefit. I think I did have a little bit of a question, and I don't know that you're going to be able to see it as clearly as I hoped in the video. Along her spine, like right, it's probably lumbar or slightly forward. There's been some musculature changes. And when she gets around beside us, might be able to see. It's like it looks like some muscling may have gone. We may have lost some muscling. But see, there's a bit of a bump right there.
Right in here where the cursor is between the withers, and here's the point of the croup and the withers. So you mean here all along her back muscles?
Just in front of the croup.
There's
a little divot. And you can kind of see there's a tiny little divot right there.
Mm-hmm.
And when you see it up close, it's like her spine is a little more raised and it's a little hollow there. And I don't feel like that way before, we missed the work, so I'm now knowing what we've already talked about. I'm wondering if that was a musculature change that was happening. And then we kind of lost some stability and maybe lost some muscling or something.
So the pointy bit at the top of the butt is the tuber sacrale of the pelvis. Okay, so that's part of the wings of the pelvic bone. And just in front of the tuber sacrale, there is a little natural dip that can be bigger on some horses and smaller on others, but that's the lumbar sacrum junction. So it's the LS joint. It's where the lumbar meets the sacrum. So is that the dip you're talking about? And it seems bigger than it used to be?
Yeah, so it's a combination of being able to sort of see more of her spine right there coming up to that joint. And then it's like on either side of it is more hollow than it was before. So like,
That sounds like just a loss of muscle. Sometimes what can happen is if, like when she's going around high-headed with the spine pushing down, the back muscles aren't really developing, but they can excessively contract. So they shorten in concentric contraction and they look bulkier, but they're tight and sore and there's restriction to the movement. So when they come out of pushing the spine down in the back, at least like when they lengthen the muscles of the top line. So her impulse to lengthen the neck, even though she's falling forward and she's dropping the pole, tells you the spine, the thoracolumbar spine through the back is no longer in a downward direction. And that muscle change associated with the change of direction in the spine vertically supples long-term chronic tightness. So the posture of long and low doesn't create a stretch of the muscle. Changing the direction of the spine releases excessive contraction. So if we called it stretching, the stretch happens, then they lengthen the neck, then they fall into long and low. So you could be seeing a couple of different things in the muscle loss. You could be seeing a change in how she's using the top line muscles. So what used to be bulky because of contraction, excessive contraction, is now supple. So she's more comfortable. She's not, doesn't show soreness there. The body worker or her movement is more comfortable for her. The body worker tells you it's more supple. All of that is good. But when they release that excessive contraction related to the spine pushing down, they look like they lost weight or muscle only because there's no more bulk from, it's just like bodybuilders. If we walk around with our muscles flexed all the time, you can look bulkier than when your muscles are more supple.
yeah.
Right. So that could be one reason, is that she's released chronic tightness, but usually you'll get more forward if that's the case, because that eccentric contraction of the back muscles sort of makes forward uncomfortable. Right. The other thing it could be is just loss of muscle. Like she doesn't look like she's underweight.
Oh,
Right.
not at all.
But she's no spring chicken. She's up near 20, isn't she?
Yeah, I think like 21.
Yeah. So she's going to lose muscle quickly and it's going to take time to build muscle. And that's why the senior feeds have extra fat, extra protein, is because older horses have a harder time building muscle and they lose it quickly, just like old people, right?
Yeah.
So it could be a loss of muscle just from a little bit of time off. And not only that, but when you took the time off, she wasn't really moving in a way that was going to habitually strengthen the back. It actually kind of taxed her back muscles because she wasn't stable when she was moving without support.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. It does. And that was like what I was thinking was probably going on, but I wanted to make sure that we were still on the right track,
Because usually if it's a horse that was chronically overly contracting the muscles and they begin to supple them, it looks like they lost weight overnight. You know what I mean? Or it looks like they lost muscle overnight. That's just a release of muscle tension that was never properly actually built up. right? So in her case, I would say she's just going to lose muscle quickly, especially during the winter.
Yeah.
So, the body's going to eat the fat stores and the muscles first when we need heat or fuel.
Yeah.
So at her age, and this is why people, when they say they retire a horse, you retire a horse in whatever habit of movement that was in the nervous system when you quit working them, right? So to maintain health as they age, it doesn't have to be hard work, but it needs to be regular, gentle work that continues to keep the muscles strong, to keep them fit as they age and comfortable moving.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. Well, that makes me feel better about that. So
Yeah, I wouldn't like, she certainly doesn't look underweight, and I think she's insulin resistant or has Cushing, so you have to be careful what she eats.
you do, yeah. And now this could also be partly because she lost the muscle on her back, but not long after I came, had the time off and started working her again, she looked too fat in the middle. And that may be because if she lost muscle tone on her back, it made it look,
Yeah, it kind of looks like the stomach drops.
yeah.
What I
And
do see that's very positive that she didn't lose was this is about as round as I've ever seen her hindquarters. So she's built a lot of muscle in the hindquarter, which tells me you might have both things going on, that she wasn't really using her back very well. So you have muscle loss there. And or she also released some tension in her back. So you have a kind of the effective deflated looking. But her hindquarter is looking rounder, like she's developing the muscles on the sides of the hindquarter. She doesn't look so overdeveloped in the gluteals and the hamstrings. She's looking more evenly developed through her hindquarter.
yeah,
So that part, and she might need that. She might need more muscular support before she can work her back muscles more. Like she just need more stability back there. And that could be why you have so little forward, is it's hard. You're building muscle. And so the long reins on the circle when you stand still are going to build that muscle of the hindquarter very quickly. But in this video, she's stopping enough. I would put it in the category of too hard. That's really the only problem. So you make the job, you can continue to give her the support with the long reins and continue to get the benefits, but you're going to have to make it easier
yeah.
with a moving circle that's less round, less perfect, or get behind her and start on straight lines. Because
That's what I was thinking, is alternating, circles and larger laps of the arena is probably, because it does, you can see it's not happening like every lap, half a lap she's stopping. It's every once in a while.
right. And you need movement. Like the movement is the priority. If they're not self-propelled and self-controlled, calm, then you can't really alter the balance and the habit of the nervous system. You don't have quite, and you have pretty good movement, but not enough forward.
Yeah.
So the changes every time she stops, she's processing in her nervous system, but it's like you're kind of losing ground because of it. And I think you would see more muscle development, and it would make it easier for her if it felt easier for her to go forward.
Yeah.
So that means move off the circles and towards straight lines, move away from accuracy towards a gentler amount of support,
Yeah.
balancing that with the forward she can give you.
And of course, this is also to the right, which the right is the harder direction. And I started in that direction, and it's cold and frozen. So like,
Right.
it's all the things in this session. So you can see it even right away. Going the other way, she has a little bit more.
Yes.
So,
Yeah, she's not as stable going to the left, but she's more forward. And that's always sort of the balance you're working with, right? So when you lose forward, You want less accuracy, straighter lines. When you have lots of forward to work with, then you can be more accurate. And the more accurate you are, and the more you use the precision of a circle, the more it slows them down. So you just have to take the energy that she's giving you to work with and adapt. And you may have to adapt differently in each direction. Like it may be standing still when she's tracking left is perfectly fine for now. But if she loses forward, right?
Yeah,
But
yeah.
to the right, it's kind of too difficult. To the left, when you have that little bit of outside bend and she can't just forget about her right hind leg and she can't fall in on her left shoulder, you will lose forward eventually. Like that's difficult for her. So where you started early to the left, she was more forward, and already she's starting to kind of wind it down.
Knowing the left is easier for her to move, is it in her condition, is it helpful to start to the left and then work to the right?
Yeah. If you're going to work on circles, yes.
Okay.
Yeah. And it's kind of like if her pattern, which it seems to be underusing the right hind leg, overusing the left front leg, putting her weight too much to the left front. And then when you track left, the right hind being on the outside is sort of easy for them to get away with not using. So what the long reins do is they pull that right hind underneath and get the left hind to widen towards the inside of the circle. So that light adduction and abduction levels the pelvis and they have to start pushing forward. The neck to the outside is because of all the slack on the inside rein, which tells you her weight going forward wants to go forward and to the left front leg. That's where her body weight's going. So with the outside bend, she can't do that. So it has a suppling effect, a stabilizing effect, but if she loses forward, you're not getting much done. So again, it would be better to work on it gently with her. And it doesn't have to be a fast pace. Like what she's doing right this second would be that I would be enough forward to get a lot of done, to get a lot of work done with her balance and how she's using herself. But there, she gives you just a little bit of forward and then she's like, oh, I can't do anymore. So if your circle was mostly that more forward, like this is kind of okay, but it would be better if she just had a little more energy in her forward.
Okay.
Like there, it gets a tiny bit better. There, it gets a little slower.
Yeah.
And she's
Okay.
like, yeah, I'm done. Yeah. Yeah. So the pattern you're seeing is that she probably, because she was always a high energy horse that ran away, right? So of course, the more they run away, when you make significant changes, they bounce completely to the other side and lose all forward. So what you want to do is continue the work that helped her get out of runaway mode. But when she's on the side of too little forward, you have to think of her like a horse that won't go forward and make it easier, straighter lines, less precision. And especially if she has time off for any reason, this I would think of starting in ways that work you back towards this specific exercise of standing still on the circle. It probably doesn't work well if you go straight to it after she has some time off.
Yeah. So assume and like drop way, way, way back. And then, as I find, okay, we can check this box off and then keep stepping up.
Yes. And what you'll find is every time you have to go back through that cycle, she'll get back to this point of the hardest version of the exercise easier and faster.
Good.
But she might need to go through that process of hand walking on the rails, loose circles mixed up with straight lines before you can do it the way you're doing it on the video.
Yeah.
Okay.
Good.
All right. So let me stop that. And who do you want to look at next? Belle?
Yeah, that's fine. I don't have any major questions with her. It's mostly just checking in.
Okay.
So we've been continuing the trot requirements, trot task. Which is funny because she will self-stop and start sometimes. So it's cute because she'll trot and then she breaks the trot, and before I can ask her to trot again, she picks it back up again.
Yeah, and getting over the hurdle of she just had a really bad association with trot. Like she got very defensive when you asked her to trot. And once you break through that, the working on the long reins, like with gaited horses, that's part of what's tough is you have to do everything in a 4-beat walk. No matter the tempo or the speed, it's a 4-beat gait. Yeah. With a non-gaited horse, when you change footfall patterns, you're using muscles very differently. And in the trot, the same work is actually less effort with their back muscles for the same balance.
Yeah.
So to get the balance in the walk requires a whole lot more exertion of back muscle use than it does in the trot. In the trot, the back muscles can kind of rest a little bit, even in the same level of balance.
We have a friend that likes to play.
Yeah.
Arena when we work, which is super fun. He literally runs around the side.
That's hilarious. There's always the token dog or cat in the videos. And that might get her going a little, which is also helpful.
A little bit.
So I like that you're walking with her.
I kind of have to, yeah.
Yeah, and that's what I mean. Like with Tally, with Belle, just to get the trot, you almost have to get behind her to get her trotting, and then work your way onto not a very perfect circle.
It's not. Eventually, we start going like way out.
Yeah, and that's, having a fence line is helpful for that. So that lack of forward, again, you're using the right strategy, kind of getting more behind her. And at the trot, you can't navigate all the jumps as easily. So you're just using the end of the arena where you have the most room to move around, which is where you have to stay with her, unless you move all the jumps and give yourself more space.
I'm fairly happy with the way she's working. Even though most of the time the trots are very short. Again, I started to the right. I know that's the harder side.
Mm-hmm.
So I tend to get a little bit longer, trot sessions out of the left when we flip around.
But theoretically,
like head is coming down. That has improved a lot.
So what she's doing is she's giving you a trot transition from your request. Where she's going to have to go is she needs to respond a little quicker, or you need to add more energy so that she learns she can be comfortable in the trot. So when I lunge horses, I want a billion transitions because I don't have the support to help them balance during the gait, right? But on the long reins, the whole point of the long reins is that we can give them support to find more stability in the midline, straightness and rotation. So a couple of approaches you can do if you have, if she's sort of fighting the trot, because a lot of times the way you're doing it with these little repetitive transitions, your timing is good. You're asking for trot as soon as she breaks. If they don't get sick of that and feel it's exhausting and choose to maintain the trot, that's one way to do it, is let the law of inertia work in your favor. Keep repeating, and eventually they go, wow, it's more work to walk trot than it is to just keep trotting. Most horses will figure it out that way. Some will not. And there's a couple things you could do. Before you put the long reins on, you can just use one rein as a lunge line and use a lunge whip and ask for canter. So do trot canter transitions just on one lunge line for 5 minutes, right? It's going to be chaos and disastrous, but hang in there with as many canter transitions as you feel she can do within 5 minutes. And then give her a walk break, let her catch her breath, because I know that'll be a big challenge for her.
Probably one in the beginning.
Yeah. And then, and the canter, because when they lack forward like this, with Tally, it's more a matter of stability. With Belle, there's a little bit of pushback. There's a lack of confidence, and she's pinning her ears when you ask for trot. So she's not confident or comfortable about going into trot or using speed. So in her mind, she's always looking for the rest, right? So in that case, if they're sound enough and it's appropriate for them, we can borrow energy by taking them up to the canter, right? And the upward transitions are going to jack up the energy. And then we have more energy to work with trot on the long reins. Because the way you're doing it, it's hard to get enough trot that you can also use the long reins during the trot.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, it's tricky.
So you might start her canter work with just say 3 canter transitions, right? Just go like with the whip, because you're going to have to give her a little tap on the butt, right? And she's going to hate it. She might buck, she might bolt, she might have a hissy fit. So keep it simple the first, I don't know, 3 or 4 times you do it, and just ask her to trot on the lunge line and throw in at least 3 canter transitions to start with, and then work your way up to trot canter for 5 minutes. Okay. And
would you suggest, again, this is the right, that's her harder side in general. So would you suggest starting out to the left?
it's her harder side because, like Tally, she underuses the right hind and overloads the left front. That's her rotation issue, her straightness issue. So when you have that particular issue, when you, especially if you're working with speed, like for Tally, putting her on the right hind first, where she's losing that much forward, tells us we should probably start with the right hind on the outside, where she is more forward, in order to make it easier. With Belle, if you want to resolve the problem, and we're going to push her into a little bit of speed transitions, you want the right hind on the inside to build the pushing power, kind of wake that leg back up and get it working. So I would do Belle to the right first and Tally to the left first.
All right.
And so just on the lunge with one rein, ask for trot. She's going to give you the same trot on the lunge that she's giving you now, but with one rein and a whip, you can add more energy into your upward transitions than you can do with the 2 reins.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So the purpose of lunging first to the right, within 5 minutes, trot, couple of canter transitions, and when her energy gets really high, put her on the long reins. And if that only takes a minute or 2, then start with a minute or 2 of the lunge. And she might get really overexcited, and then you've got something to work with on the long reins. Yeah. So then on the long reins, in fact, take away the 5 minutes of walk, because once you get the energy up, you want to use it, because it's not going to last long for her.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So use the lunge line and some canter transitions to really get her thinking forward and get the energy level up. Then when she's kind of jacked up and forward, put the outside rein on and ask for trot first. And then keep your trot time to 5 minutes total. But really, if you have to, like you're doing here, if her energy is more jacked up and she believes that you might touch her with the whip, then you could probably get her to hold the trot for 5 minutes and actually start to work on her balance in the trot. So on the lunge line, we can't alter their balance. We're just using it to kind of change the energy level.
Yeah.
The long reins, we can work on their balance, but her brain, like the ear pinning with every transition, the fact that she's not building her trot strides as you're repeating, because you're doing a good job with the timing and the repetition. It's just not working for her.
Yeah.
She's like, yeah, I could do this all day. Less trot, the better. So you have to kind of tip the scale a little too far over in the forward excitement direction. And then on the long reins, you can show her how to be more comfortable in the trot, which will help her hopefully choose it more often rather
Yeah.
than push
Yeah.
back against it.
Yeah.
And keep the speed sessions short so that, like, at first, no more than 5 minutes of, like, say 2 or 3 minutes of the lunging, 5 minutes of the trotting, and good, bad, or otherwise, then let her walk for like 10 or 15 minutes or the rest of the time.
Yeah.
Because at the walk, if she'll stay forward, usually the speed work first helps them stay forward at the walk later in the session. And if you can stand still and she walks after you do the speed work, her muscles, you will have put her body into some changes and some questions. So then by the time you get to the walk and you stand still, you're actually really affecting more change.
Yeah.
And you condition the nervous system stronger. But she needs that forwardness for you to be able to stand still at the walk, and she needs the trot work, and even a little bit of canter would really help because she gets so fixed in her pattern.
Yeah.
And that's why she's not finding her comfort in trot. She's being obedient, but she's not finding second gear. Like, she's just not finding the comfort that she needs to find within the trot.
Yeah.
So letting her explore trot and canter, even though it's going to be crap on the lunge line, it'll build the energy and it'll get her using different muscles. And then when you come back to the long reins, hopefully you have enough energy to get 5 minutes of trot work. And then by that time, she's like, oh, the walk actually sounds like a relief instead of work.
Yeah.
Right.
She
So
does pretty good on the walk, even after me working so hard to get her into the trot. You know, like eventually I do give her a walk break in this direction, and then
yeah.
and
And
we
if
switch directions
and when,
again. But
like, if she were just coming back into work and not getting anything regular and she had been out of work for a while, I would be happy with what you have. But the fact that she's been back in work relatively, regularly and is getting fitter, that's when I'm going to push a little bit and say, maybe we need to change her mind and have her explore her body by just exploring speed. She just hasn't gone fast on purpose, right? For a while.
Yeah.
And you don't want to do so much that she gets sore or lame or has an injury, but you just want that taste test of a little canter and trot on the lunge line to get her excited.
Yeah.
And then see if she can hold that excitement for 5 minutes so that you could actually use the long reins during the trot. Because the way it's going, you don't have enough trot to get straightness at the trot.
Yeah.
And what's kind of perpetuating the problem is then she goes, well, when I walk and balance, my back works very hard. I don't like it. So everything in her mind just falls into the category of too hard, too difficult. And the trot is actually her relief, but she doesn't know it yet because she just doesn't know how to trot in a way where her back can be relaxed.
Yeah. She has been exploring putting her head down, which is fairly new for her, and I like that. Like
during the trot.
No, during the walk, which again, like fairly new for her since I've started working her again.
Great.
And lots more mouth movement and exploring, moving with her neck and stuff. So
yeah, and I
think you're right.
she's pretty forward at the walk, But again, you'll get more done. Like the walk is where she looks far more cooperative, which is her telling us the trot's too hard. If the lunging and building the excitement gives you a bigger setback than an advancement, then you're going to have to just do very little work on the trot and keep working at the walk. But I think if you play with the speed on the lunge line and then the balance on the long reins and put those two things together, you'll get more and more of her lengthening that neck
Yeah.
because she is playing with it more than I've seen.
Yes.
And for the draft horses, that's no small feat. They are very front end strong.
It's like years of hard work trying to just get like,
Yeah.
yeah.
And she's not just plunging forward, she's sort of tentatively lengthening her neck and trying to find her stability somewhere else at the same time. Where, you know, what Tally is doing is sort of lengthening the neck and capsizing forward.
Yeah. Yeah.
Where Belle is taking it a little slower. She goes, if I gently lengthen my neck, can I keep moving and feel stable?
Yeah. Yeah. See, like that's really nice. And she's licking and chewing a lot.
Yeah. So that's where you're going to build your forward at the walk is through the suppleness in the muscles, right? But you also need her to get more comfortable with speed and not be like, I always want to stop because I hate speed. I hate going forward. So little by little, play with it on the lunge line. And then you should have more excitement, and changing gaits on non-gated horses changes the muscle use. So in a sense, it wakes up the body. It doesn't mean balance is perfect or ideal, but it just sort of maybe challenges some tight areas or get some muscles working that haven't been working in a while.
Yeah.
So it's good to play with. And with her, again, she's no spring chicken. So you watch her breathing. I think in the summer she has challenge with sweating. So the winter is a good time to play with speed,
Yeah.
especially as your warm up, because it will literally warm them up,
Yeah.
especially
The
when they're.
ground isn't too frozen. That was actually why I worked her after Tally, because by the time I worked her, it was beginning to fall. When I started with Tally, it was pretty solid frozen. So I waited and did her second. So the frozen ground's the only thing I really have to worry about. But she has improved for the farrier, because you'll remember that she was really struggling to hold up her front feet. And so she has definitely made improvements for the farrier, which is good. And she is trimmed again next week. So, or actually this week. So I was going to go on Wednesday. I think our weather is going to hold on Wednesday. So
Okay.
I'll
And
experiment.
again, sort of similar to Tally, she wants to lean on the left front shoulder. She's a tiny bit more forward this direction, just like Tally. But the neck will be bent to the outside more often, which until she stabilizes the hindquarter, that's just where the neck's going to go a lot. Whenever she falls on the inside front, the neck to the outside disallows that. So yeah, but after, because you've been working with her basically since November and it's January, and she hasn't quite found a desire to stay in the trot, which usually when you're doing transitions this rapidly, it's less work for them to stay in trot than it is to do this many transitions, right?
Yeah.
But she hasn't figured that out. So that's where I would, in November, this was acceptable. A couple of months later, we go, I don't think that's working. She's not figuring it out. She's not getting it, right? So we changed strategies, use the lunge line first, then the long reins. You're still going to have to walk with her like you are during the trot, and then stand still at the walk, even when you use the lunge line first to build up the energy. And again, depending on the weather, her age, how she's using herself, just you want to challenge her on the lunge line with more speed, but nothing that's going to risk an injury or exhaust her or make her sweaty on a cold day. It's just play with it appropriately. And the point of it is not that the trotter canter is going to be any good at all on the lunge line, but the upward transitions will get her excited enough that you can maybe improve keep her trotting on the long lines.
Yeah.
Yeah, because this is kind of winding itself. She starts off better to the left, just like Tally, but both of them are kind of quickly winding down into a loss of forward. And even walking with her, it's still not helping her stay in the trot. So by this time, if she's not choosing it, I don't think she's going to figure it out unless we change strategies.
The fact that she was doing so well at the walk is really the only reason that I didn't change or question sooner.
Yeah.
Because I feel like she's improved nicely at the walk, which made me happy. But yeah, the trot is sticky. In the beginning, trot was novel, and so there was a lot more into it. Now
it was exciting to her.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, there were times where it was hard to get the bridle on and get the lines in the right place because she was trying to take off on me.
Right. And
But
anytime, because again, she can fluctuate from no forward to taking off. And she usually, even when under saddle, by the time you get your leg over the saddle, she's taking off at the trot, but it only lasts for like a second. It doesn't last very long. I do like, and what helps her leg joints, what helps with the engagement is this precise circle that you're doing at the walk. So the farrier issue, her not wanting to pick up her legs easily for the farrier, is resolved when you see more of the neck lengthening, which is only going to happen for her at the walk. It's not going to happen anytime soon at the trot or the canter. Maybe the trot, maybe she'll make a liar out of me, like maybe on the lunge line at the trot. But that change in her neck use, searching for that length, tells you she's releasing a lot of chronic tightness and starting to use the hindquarter differently, but they all lose forward when they get to long and low. That's the other thing that kind of works against us. So yeah, she makes the change, but the key to balance is once they're long and low, that we can increase the speed, right? Because on the long reins, once they're long and low, they all choose to decrease the speed. So if we can increase the speed and keep the neck long, then they can come out of long and low and start to find better balance. But yeah, this stuckness at the walk, it's like, I would try the strategy with her of lunging, then long reins, but you may even have to take the same strategy we talked about with Tally if she gets stuck. Make yours with Belle, I would start on a precise circle. If she starts losing forward like that, then walk with her, make your circle bigger by walking with her. And as a last resort, go behind and drive her.
Yeah.
She might freak out. She might think you're going to harness her. So.
Well, so the couple times that I have inadvertently ended up behind her for whatever reason, like sometimes I'll drive her back to the other end of the arena, where the gate is. She's just super wobbly. Like it's not really helpful for her balance. I mean, like if she were getting as stuck as Callie, then we might need to go there. But like if I'm behind her, we're not really working on her balance at that.
Well, and that's true with all horses. So the minimal support, like the minimal change that we're asking for would be hand walking on the rail. The next level of challenge is the long reins walking behind them. It's a little bit more, we can be a little bit more precise about the straightness with the long reins walking behind them. But the point of being less precise is to help them stay forward, right? So then the third layer of difficulty would be working on a moving, imprecise circle. And the highest level of difficulty is what you're doing. So anytime I start to lose forward and they're stopping, if they stop more than once in a session and they're moving slowly when they're moving, then I need more forward. If they're mostly maintaining forward and it's slow and steady and they maybe stop once, then I have enough forward to keep going. And what you're describing is she feels steadier when you're on a circle because she needs that much support to get steady, right? So ultimately, that's what we want for her. But again, like Tally, if they're losing forward, we're never going to find that balance of lengthening and pushing from behind, right? So they'll kind of like just slow down and stay with the back contracted. And as soon as they release the muscles of the top line, they stop. So then they never quite learn the balance within the movement. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So if you can keep her moving with a long neck at the walk on a precise circle, that's ideal. That's going to give you your biggest changes the fastest. But if she can't, when she lengthens her neck, maybe move with her to keep her going with a long neck, right? If you lose forward completely, high neck or low neck, you might need to work behind her and be less precise to just tell her, keep moving, keep moving.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. But she's much happier at the walk than with the trot transition. She's tolerating the trot transitions pretty well, but she still doesn't like them. She still doesn't like trot at all.
Yeah. Well, I was just pleased with the fact that she's been as willing as she is, even though like she's not great. It's still better than what it could have been or has been. So
yes. No, there's definite improvements. And on both horses, I see more muscle built on the hindquarters.
good.
Not the back yet, but the hindquarters.
Yeah.
Then we have Storm on a stormy day.
Yeah.
Who starts off like a thoroughbred and ends like a draft.
So the hilarious part is that I worked Tally and Bell, I think it was like Wednesday, it was like 47. This is Friday, it's like barely 40 and like 20-mile-an-hour winds, and the farrier is going to be here in like 30 minutes. So
this is perfect.
Than we normally work. Yes, it's much shorter than we normally work, but I was like, I can't not work him before the farrier's here, knowing he's had the same problems as Bell. But I actually am really happy with this session because he was nervous getting going and, like coming out of the pasture and everything, he wasn't settled and relaxed. And yet we were still able to settle in. Okay.
Yeah.
I think he's about to pitch a temper tantrum, which is hilariously small compared to what it used to be. Maybe not this lap, it might be the next lap.
Yeah. See, with Storm, he's at least, even though he's breaking the trot and he's not holding it consistently, you're getting half or 3/4 of a lap before he breaks. That's barely enough time. Now, that excitement is normal for horses that are tight through the muscles, right? So if they're tight, they bounce between, I can't barely move forward and I'm going to blow up. The wind is helping kind of give you that forward energy that I was saying you need on the lunge line with Bell. So depending on the weather, maybe you don't need to lunge, right? But the same would be true for Storm, except Storm is giving you enough forward that you can affect his balance during the trot.
Yeah.
Right? If you can't get that, then you have the option, stay at the walk and improve the walk and try trot later, or go to the lunge line, work on trot and maybe even a few canter transitions to build the energy, and then end your session on the long reins with a little bit of trot and a lot of walk.
So I have in a couple sessions.
Sorry, go ahead.
I have in a couple of his sessions actually purposely thrown in a canter transition on the long lines because of the way he was looking. Like he was just looking sort of stuck in the trot and not in a very good posture. So I used the canter, and I would only use it generally once or twice, and then he would come out. Today I didn't need it clearly because
Yeah, and
had
if
the
you
wind
can,
was-
getting the canter transition on the long reins without a whip is difficult. If you can get it, because it'll do
yeah,
the same thing. But what I would do, again, you have plenty of space in this arena. You have the impulse for him to trot. He's thinking forward in the trot, but the accurate small circle is making it difficult for him. So he's starting to lose the desire to trot. So that's where I would walk the circle he's on and take him all the way out towards the rail using about half the arena, and he would probably hold the trot longer for you and become more forward rather than less forward. So circles are like hills. The tighter the circle, the steeper the hill. So when we stay on a circle that can just be done with the long reins with us standing still, it's a very steep hill. So you're going to use a lot of energy up. When we
yeah,
move around with them and we make this circle bigger, more straight, less turn, and when we walk with them, we're typically less accurate, less precise on the long reins. Those two things help them maintain the forward impulse. So he would probably choose to trot longer if you walked that size circle and he had double the space.
yeah,
I think he would stay in the trot, especially on a nice windy day and cool weather.
yeah. And like if I have that circle there, then I'll feel like I'm able to maintain some level of accuracy. One of the challenges is when they start getting wobbly and they're not trotting well, is maintaining a reasonable through consistent circle so that the long lines are actually doing something.
Yes and no, because with the long reins, you're always balancing forward with straightness. Sometimes you have to put the emphasis on forward, and it's kind of a loose, it's basically lunging because you're not really using the outside rein, but it's there and ready to be used once the forward impulse sort of takes hold, right? So think of it when you're on the long reins, you don't necessarily always have to switch to a lunge line. You can just not use the outside rein too much. And basically you're lunging in a way to say, let's get you to think forward and then I'll work on the accuracy. So you can be on the long reins, but treat it more like lunging. And,
Yeah,
don't worry if your circle is accurate. Don't worry if the feel on the reins is accurate. And unless he really falls in, you don't really need to use the outside rein at all while you're trying to get him to think more forward.
yeah.
Right? Because
Just
it's tough. It's
maintain the rein, but don't worry about using it.
right. You can have it there ready to use, but you don't have to always keep it active and be accurate with it. It's difficult to have the two reins and a whip. So,
I thought about it and then I'm like, no, I'm not gonna do that.
but even if you did do that, once you have the whip to manage plus the two reins, there's no way you're going to be accurate. Right. So for horses that are super unstable or have a lameness issue, that would be the only time I would be on the long reins with a whip to try to help build the forward and maintain accuracy. But you're kind of busy like a one-legged man in a butt kicking contest. You got lots to do. So you're not going to be as accurate as when you don't use a whip. It's tougher to be accurate when you use a whip. So my preferred strategy is be less accurate and give them more space to move forward.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that's what you end up doing as I'm watching the video. That's kind of what you gravitated into because he was losing more and more forward.
Yeah.
If you feel like you're working harder than him, which is what it's sort of turning into right about here, then I would say I'm going to get more work done with a walk on an accurate circle than I'm going to get done by pushing him to trot when the trot's looking more and more lethargic. I have to be less accurate at the trot just to keep it going. If they will continue to maintain their own forwardness at the walk, then I would rather work with that. Right. And it's typical, like him and Belle, typical draft horses, they come out like they're on fire and they're 20 hands tall. And all of that energy is like, I'm spent after 5 minutes.
Yeah.
It just doesn't take long for them to really blow out that energy unless they're super scared. And a scared draft horse is not fun. It's
Forever. Like the energy doesn't run out when you have a spirit.
yes, that is a lot of horsepower when you have a scared draft horse.
I was really pleased. I mean, this whole video is only 14 minutes long, and I literally trotted him in one direction, trotted him in the other direction, and then walked, I guess, for what, like 8 or 9 minutes.
Yes.
And he was as calm as a cucumber the whole time for the farrier, despite the fact that the wind is rattling all the barn doors, and he totally chilled out. So
it is a great way to prepare the horse for a farrier, especially with bad weather. And depending on the horse, you could, because you're physically warming up the joints that make it easier and warming up the back, make it easier for the horses to hold their legs up for the farrier. You're also spending any energy that might be pent up from the weather or the environment, but you're spending it in a positive way. And the more you see the horse lengthen the neck on the circle, the more supple the muscles are becoming. So you're working out patterns of tension and tightness that might make it uncomfortable for them to hold the leg up for the farrier. That really doesn't matter if it's walk or trot.
She was able to put him in fairly normal farrier holds, which he really hasn't done for almost a year.
Great.
After, and like I said, I was rushed. I didn't, I used my phone for the time. And of course I'm recording this, so I don't know what time it is.
Yes.
So
yes.
I was like, I wasn't even as focused and aware as I wanted to be. And yet it was perfect. It was just the right amount.
And when you're using this as a way to prepare the horse to deal with the farrier or the vet or whatever, when you run out of energy for the trot, work at the walk. To build his capacity of trot, you're going to have to walk that circle you're carving out with his feet and put him all the way out on the rail, because he's got to have more straight lines to be able to comfortably maintain the trot without you having to constantly push. And the more we're having to push for trot, the more they end up thinking backwards. It doesn't always help. It's better to find what is the path of least resistance where he feels the desire to maintain the trot. Right. But yeah, for your purpose of getting him ready for the farrier, as soon as he calmed down and he didn't really want to trot, you're achieving all the suppleness and joint warm up and comfort factor that you want for the farrier just at the walk.
Yeah.
You're still getting that done, because whether it's walk, trot, or canter, you're getting the same theoretical skeletal coordination, which affects the muscles a little differently at each speed, but basically similar, because the balance can be the same at all 3 speeds.
I liked when he stopped, he was much more upright on his front legs than he has been in the past. And he chose to go forward again. I didn't ask him. He looked like he was really internalizing something. So that's actually why I waited, because that didn't look like I just don't want to do this stop. That was like a processing stop.
Excellent.
And he has been doing that more. Like, it's different than it is with Belle and Tally.
Yes. And you can tell by the body language, the frequency, where their ears are, and what the ratio or percentages of stopping to choosing forward.
That's his favorite spot, though, clearly.
And it's a good
and like crazy there.
Right. And it's not going to hurt anything to sort of wait and see what happens. And if they are actually processing, they often put themselves back into forward motion before you ask. And if they're doing it as a way to avoid changing in the forward motion, you have to push them to ever go forward.
Yeah.
And that's sometimes how you know the difference. But his ears are showing he's focused. He's sort of playing with the bit, but he's not got any high energy with tension or anxiety. So he's not defensive. And on this cool, breezy day, for him to just be that calm to stop and process is awesome.
Yeah, for him, that's pretty huge.
Yeah. And for him to stay there, he didn't even put his head up when you were done and you're undoing the reins.
Yeah.
So that sort of shows you, like, that demeanor says mission accomplished on the long reins. He's ready for the farrier.
Yeah.
Yeah. And some days he may need to trot for 20 minutes to get there, and other days he might not need to trot at all to get there. So you kind of play with it.
Yeah.
And factoring in the weather and that as well.
Yeah.
So I think, let me go back to the beginning. But yeah, Belle and Storm have quite a bit in common, and Tally is just totally different.
Yeah. I feel like Storm is a little further along than Belle at this point, which isn't surprising knowing I've had a lot more work with him, than I have with her. But
So just notice when you first start, he still will lateralize his walk a little bit.
he also has a tendency to curl more behind when he starts.
Yes. So when he starts, his legs, he almost lateralizes his walk, and sometimes he does lateralize it, which just tells you how tight the back is.
Yeah.
Right? That's an extremely, extremely tight back. So there, the fussiness with his neck and mouth is during the lateralization of the legs, which means his back is locked up. You push him to trot, and that looks like a good solution for him. It broke the lateral walk and got him to change his neck use. Yeah. So when you see that, even if he doesn't maintain the trot, that was a very good decision on your part, because it got him to unfreeze his back. Right. And what he tends to do in the walk, when his back gets that tight and he starts to move with the legs laterally, I think that's where it's almost a distraction, but he starts searching for the answer in a weird neck use. He gets behind the vertical, over curls, bends his neck a little, gets mouthy. And that little tiny blow up was probably his back waking up. Right. So that's also typical. If you see the lateralized walk, when you push for more forward and more, especially at trot on a non-gated horse, they can't keep the back frozen at trot. So it's a way of breaking that up.
Yeah.
And then when you let him come back to walk, if he does that when he comes out excited and it becomes a bit of a habit, I would go to trot as soon as you did in this video for that reason.
Generally what we've been doing is pretty much head into the work, and so I kind of establish a circle and get myself in order, and then we get right up into the trot. So most of the time it's not more than a lap or two of walk before we hear the trot. So
now that he's trotted a little, I would let him walk, see what he chooses. If he lateralizes again, bump him back into trot. And if that keeps happening, like, I want to see what he does on his next walk, because the more he sort of trots along there, that's a 4-beat walk. That's a normal walk. So when he has a normal walk, you could choose to just leave him there until the walk gets screwed up again and then go back to trot. So sometimes if they have abnormalities like that, like Rafalco will overcurl his neck forward whenever he's pushing his back down. And he starts getting really mouthy and making gestures, like pain gestures with his mouth and playing with the bit. And anytime I would see that at the walk, it was his conditioned way of telling me he was starting to tighten his back and push it down. So I would bump him into trot. And that was the only way I could finally develop a walk that wasn't that. If I left him in the walk, we got stuck there. It never changed.
Yeah.
And if I only trotted, we never fixed the walk. So what
Yeah.
I had to do, which is kind of what I'm recommending for you, is if you see him lock his back and lateralize the legs, or he shows you that sort of signature use of the neck and mouth where you know it's happening, then bump him into trot. But when he comes out of the trot, you can also look, if it's a good walk, take your time going back to trot, because he needs a little bit of work, probably even early in the session. If it's a good walk, he should warm up that way. And that will get rid of that little nervous habit in the nervous system of freezing the back and lateralizing the legs.
Yeah.
So like with Rafalco, if he walked even in long and low and didn't put his nose between his knees, then I would allow him to stay in the walk and I wouldn't ask for the trot. And then that better walk lasted at first only a couple of strides. And then his nose went between his knees again, and we were back in the ugly walk. So then I would go to trot. He would come out of it by sending him to trot. And then when he would choose to transition back to walk, I just watched what he did. And gradually, he could start to hold that walk without over curling the neck and going into that stress pattern for longer and longer and longer. But it was literally built up strides at a time because that walk was so strong in his nervous system. It was such a conditioned pattern from having his head and neck positioned with leverage, but it didn't match the fact that his back was in extension going down. So it
Yeah.
just became a
You
really
kind
bad
of done
habit.
that. You know, like you said, there's a signature like head position and neck position. And there have been a couple sessions where we've had where he's done that at the trot. And so when I bumped him up to trot, he's sort of maintained that like tense look, like it just doesn't look good. And I'm like, I don't like that, but the walk
Then
wasn't good and it's locked in the trot. So that was when I would use a canter transition and
perfect.
gently it would pull him out.
Yes. And
Yeah.
if you can't pull them out of it, like you're describing, they do it in the walk, so you go to trot. They continue it in the trot, so you go to canter. The canter either breaks it or they can continue it in the canter. And then what you have to do is allow them to break the canter, break the trot, go all the way back to walk. Because through the transitions between each gait is where they're going to make the change. So
Yeah.
the more transitions, the better, which would
Yeah.
be maybe on the long lines, maybe lunging. I don't know. But it doesn't seem, it's just a little bit of a residual part of his old habit of just locking his back, tightening it. It looks like what you're doing is breaking the pattern. So my only point in talking about all of this is, even though your intention is to warm him up with trot first, I wouldn't step over that opportunity when he gives you a good walk early in the session to just let him have a half a lap or a lap, as long as the walk is not lateralizing, and let him go, oh, I can warm up in a normal walk. I don't have to start off with a locked back.
Yeah. Well, and I think it will also help him too, because part of why we've been using the speed is because this is a new location where we're making sure that he's burning off any of the excess energy. It would be helpful for him to be able to come out and just walk and not need to burn off excess energy.
Right.
So yeah, I appreciate that reminder to be able to use both. You know, this day was definitely we need to burn it out quick, but
Yes.
you know, on a day when it's not, you know, blustery and crazy, then I'd like to be able to not have to use the energy up. that is
Yeah.
nice sometimes.
And we kind of get these ideas of training sessions in our head and forget to just be flexible. And so one of the things you can train yourself to do is become a better observer of posture and use. And especially if I'm dealing with a horse that's tricky or having a hard time, like right there, that walk, he starts to show his best movement yet. So sometimes that'll happen only in the trot, never in the walk. Sometimes only in the walk, never in the trot. Sometimes they only begin to make changes in the canter. But if you start to look at the movement, the posture, the overall sense of ease and energy of the movement, wherever the balance looks best is where you are conditioning the nervous system the most towards a new and better habit. It doesn't matter the speed or direction or the gait. It's the posture and the use that you're observing that's conditioning the nervous system to a new habitual coordination of the skeleton. So I kind of gave up, unless I'm really working on trot or canter to build fitness at a certain stage of training with a horse. If I'm just trying to build general balance or get them out of the worst habits of misuse, I might do my session not knowing if I'm going to trot or canter or walk or what percentage of time. I can just kind of read what the horse is giving me on any given session and go with the flow.
Yeah.
And it doesn't even have to be equal when I switch directions. I could do mostly walk on one direction and mostly trot on another direction. That might be the path of least resistance for that particular horse.
Yeah.
So for you as a rider and trainer, that might be with all three horses something to keep in your mind, because we never know when they accidentally stumble into their best use. And if we're really observant and we don't have a strong agenda in our mind for the day, then we're not going to miss those golden moments.
Yeah.
Because they're easy to step over going, no, no, I said trot. But he goes, but I'm giving you this fabulous walk. And you go, yeah, but my mind we're trotting. So that can't be right.
Yeah.
And when you start to just observe the posture, whether it's tally or bell or storm, because it's kind of fun when you're doing the same exercise on three different horses. You become very good at it. And as you get the feel and the timing that you've developed, and you understand how to adapt to play with the energy, like we talked about today, then really you spend your time observing and you see more and more and more the more you observe with curiosity rather than kind of having this ABC you're going to accomplish that day.
Yeah.
Because anytime you see a good movement, good step, that's what we want.
Yeah.
We don't always know when it's going to show up, but we can recognize it when it happens.
Yeah.
And encourage it by not doing anything.
Yeah. It's funny, like that's why I let him stand there. He wasn't distracted on a crazy blustery day.
Yeah.
His posture was better. He wasn't like looking around anywhere. And so I was like, okay, I'm gonna take that.
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly.
That's so rare at this point. So,
And
yeah.
it wasn't like watching Tally or Bell where you could tell they were looking for that the entire time. He's actually thinking forward, holding a rhythm. Sometimes it's slow, but he's maintaining it. He's not trying to stop every couple of strides.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Any other questions?
I don't think so from these. Now we just have to pray the weather lets me keep going.
Yes. Yes. And even if you don't get a lot of time, you can. I know it's always a trip to the barn. So it's like you
Yeah.
can't just, but even if you're out at the barn for any reason, not planning on working, sometimes 10 and 20-minute sessions just keep reminding the body that you don't need to do the old habit. We're working on this new habit. So I would take advantage of any little windows of time that you have, especially with storm, if you're at the barn for something else. Even a 5 or 10 minute walk around on the long reins or a couple of trot transitions, the more often you work, the more you reinforce the habit or the nervous system changes.
Yeah. So far, we've pretty much been able to maintain once a week with everybody.
Yay.
All three of them. So
Excellent.
yeah, I keep like dodging weather. I'm like, well, it's Tuesday this week, but it's Friday next week. But like, and again, as I mentioned before, I've been very happy that Tally and Belle are pretty willing to be caught. There was a little time
Yeah. It's a
that,
sign that they're enjoying the work more.
yeah, there was a little time that Belle was giving me not a big fit, but I was having to walk around a bit. She was making me work to catch her.
Yes.
And now it's like she might move away, but it'll be like 2 steps. And then generally she just kind of stops and stands there and sort of looks at me, and she might move her head away, but then she'll still be caught. So
Good.
And sometimes I don't even bring both of them into the arena either. I leave one in the field and bring one in the arena.
Oh, good.
Yeah,
Good.
I'm trying to switch things up with them as much as possible, just for their own sakes, because I think they've done things one way for so long that
Yeah.
it's not helpful for them. But
Yeah, it's
yeah.
good for them to mix it up a little bit.
Yep.
Okay, let me stop there.